Welcome, everyone, to another week's episode of Encounter with God Together, our weekly audio and video podcast, where we review the readings in our daily Bible reading guide called Encounter with God Together. And you might see that my guest this week is a little frozen in time. My guest this week is Jonny Radcliff, who is a youth speaker, minister, and national coordinator of resource development at the National Network of Youth Ministries. Jonny, that's always a mouthful. Jonny agreed to do this episode, and then we just could not align our schedules to match. So he came up with the idea that he would record his session because he really wanted to discuss 1 Kings 1-4, which we are now going into this week. So I am going to duck out of here in a minute and make him full screen, and I'll come back when he's finished with his presentation. But I'm glad you're here. Glad you're watching, and welcome to a new week of Encounter with God Together. Let's see if I can make this happen.
Hello, everyone out there. Thank you for putting up with me doing it a little in an unconventional way today. I know that I'm recording this and Gail is introducing it. I don't know what Gail said ahead of time or after this, so this is kind of crazy. It's a little different, but I love the book of 1 Kings. I'm telling you, and 2 Kings to that end. So when I was asked, can I do this? We couldn't get the same schedule, but I was like, you know what? Maybe we can try something crazy because I really, really, really want to talk about this. And even in my own personal devotions, this is what I'm going through. What I realized is that I don't know a ton about the lineage of the kings. And when I look at the Bible, there are different parts that I look at and I'm like, these are kind of gaps in knowledge. The lineage of the kings is the big one. And even, the minor prophets, so the way that they overlap with the king's lineage, if you've ever done a study like that, it's fascinating to do them both at the same time. That's what I'm currently in. And that's why I'm super excited to talk about this with you today. But before we do that, I got to ask you a question. Now, wherever you're at, you have to answer on your own. That's the rule. If you could live in any era of American history, what would it be? Maybe we're going to limit that down to a decade, but I would say if you could pick any decade to live in your prime, let's say as a 20-year-old, right? Like the decade that you would most want to experience, what would that be? I love history. I would love to time travel. That would be my superpower of choice. But I tell you what, as I'm thinking over everything, this goes through my head a lot. I think the best era to live in would be the 1980s. That's right. We're going back to the 1900s for this one. Now, listen, I was a young kid in the 80s, but, toddler doesn't really cut it. I'm talking like functional adult in the 80s. I think that's the best era to live in. Number one, the music was incredible. Fantastic stuff. I mean, you got Journey, you got Boston, you got all these bands that are just like, you got the shredder hair metal band. Like, dude, that poofy hair. I mean, come on, that's reason enough. Forget about it. I think the 80s are the best. It was before the internet came and destroyed the world, but still technology was such that, the common cold doesn't wipe out half of Europe. I think the 1980s were the best era, but I could be wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. But as we're talking about the best eras, if you were to ask anyone this question in the years of Israel, there is a correct answer. The best era to live would have been during the reign of Solomon. I mean, the Bible makes it clear that this was the time. In fact, this passage that you're going to be reading, 1 Kings 1, and then all the way through chapter 4, I want to jump to the end just to give you a taste. You're going to read some of the drama. You're going to read some of the conflict that it took to get to the throne. But what I really want to show you is the end where it all makes sense, why this is indeed the golden era. 1 Kings 4:20 says this. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subject all his life. Jumping to verse 24, it says, "For he ruled over the kingdoms west of the Euphrates, from Tifsah, to Gaza, and he had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, lived in safety, everyone under their own vine, and everyone with their own fig tree." Can you imagine that provision? In verse 26, it says Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. That's a lot. That's also great protection. The district governors, each in his month, supplied provisions for King Solomon and all who came to the king's table. They saw to it that nothing was lacking. They also brought to the proper place their quotas of barley and straw for the chariot horses and the other horses. Folks, this is the point where everyone has their own vine. There's peace, there's safety, there's provision. All of this is the promise of God being realized. When he made that covenant to Abraham, saying, you're going to dwell in the land, your descendants will be just unable to be counted, all of these things, like the promises of God just started to come among his people. And it was at the peak of Solomon. Listen, the life of David, there was war. He was a warrior. There was a lot of fighting, and there was a lot of inconsistency. Even when he got to the throne, that there were people conspiring against him. It was a power play left and right. But the reign of Solomon was the golden era. It never was better before that, and it never was as good as when Solomon was at the helm. So as you're about to read these, let's jump in just kind of chapter by chapter, what we're going to be looking at. Just know that like this is as good as it gets. So and so as you're reading this, just know this is as good as it gets. We're going to look at 1 Kings 1, and here's the first thing. David is on his deathbed. That's how this book of the Bible starts. The most beloved king to that point, the one who followed after the things of the Lord, he's about to die. And anytime there is a king about to die, there's some sort of power play for his position, for his throne. So Adonijah was the next logical heir to the throne. David had multiple sons, but Adonijah was Haggith's son. And as soon as he starts looking like he's going to die, everyone starts to get ready. They're like, okay, we're going to take over the throne. All right. And then, there's Solomon, which is Bathsheba's son, over here. And then it just kind of starts to well up. And then the question is, who's going to be king? Who's going to sneak in there? Who's going to make it happen? So as Adonijah is like getting ready, he's feeling really good about his chances. David anoints Solomon. Now, there's something that you may miss from reading this. Solomon wasn't the next logical heir to the throne according to birth order. You see, that's how God works. God has not just stuck to the structure. Like if you think back all the way to Jacob and Esau, Esau was the firstborn, even though they were twins. He was the firstborn, but Jacob was the one that was in the line of succession. You see, even in the Old Testament, God has been choosing his people out of order, how he's going to use. It goes against the concept of the world like crazy. So Adonijah's there, feeling pretty good that he's the next guy. And then all of a sudden, word comes in that Solomon's king. And then all the people scatter. Adonijah's like, I'm going to die. He's going to take me out so that way he can have a safe throne. And he doesn't. He spares his life. But even though that happened, you're going to read in 1 Kings chapter 2 how there was still some shrewdness that Solomon needed. He needed to be alert and vigilant and to realize that there were people who were still coming for his throne. Just because you're installed as king didn't mean you were safe. In fact, as you continue to read the lineage of the kings after this, you're going to see it's a constant power struggle. There's a lot going on. But early on, Solomon established his throne. And you're going to see another story of that in First Kings 2. And this chapter actually has the end of David. I want to read this here. This is First Kings 2, verse 10. It says, "Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron, and 33 in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established." So there you have it. The third king of Israel, Solomon. Goes Saul, David, Solomon. So then after he makes an example of Shimei, I'm not going to ruin the story for you. You got to read it. But takes care of Shimei in kingly fashion. We jump to 1 King 3. Now, this is the part where you get to see his relationship with the Lord. And that was the steadfast part of the beginning of his life. In 1 Kings 3, it says this: "Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David. Except," oh no, not except. Don't do that. Don't do that. "Except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places." You see, far too often in the book of First Kings, we see that these kings leave the door cracked. We see that as you get further into Solomon's life, I'm going to ruin the end for you here, unfortunately, but the ladies in his life started to distract his attention from the one true God. And what was very common during this time was to follow your God, sure, but then also, like, let's just like pay tribute to the Babylonian gods just in case, you know what I mean? Like, let's make sure that the Canaanite gods are represented. Like, maybe we burn some incense to Baal over here, and maybe Asherah poles are a good thing. Not that our God isn't enough, but like, let's just make sure. The door being cracked by one king is often the door that gets blown open by the next king. As I said multiple times, this is as good as it gets for Israel. The life of Solomon, even though he had a great start, he didn't have a great finish. And the carnage just plays out after that. So he started walking with the Lord. But then in 1 Kings 4, you're going to see more of how he flourished, how it was a golden age, how the temple was in full swing, and just how God was blessing this nation. So as far as background info into this and just what we can gather from this, up to this point, the life of Solomon is just the culmination of God's promises. It is what the nation of Israel was working towards. It was, if Abraham could have seen just a glimpse into the future of what God promised when he brought him out under the stars, like if he could say, like, hey, I'm going to bring you into a land and your descendants are going to reign, you're going to have kings coming from you. But then there's the promise, and this is where it gets upsetting. God's people, as long as they're following God's way in God's land, it's good. And it was. But then they started to turn their direction the other way. They started to go this way. They started to turn their attention away. And then that provision, that blessing, we see the other side of it. When God said, If you follow my commands, you'll be in the land. It'll be fruitful. It'll be harmonious. But throughout the rest of First Kings, we're going to see the other side of it. But when God says, but if you veer from my commands, it's not going to go well. Invaders will come in. The land won't produce food. Things are going to get hard. So, with where you're at right now, enjoy the first 4 chapters. Try to picture yourself in the story, in Solomon's temple, seeing people from all over the world flock to test his wisdom, to see his chair, to see the pomp and circumstance of Israel. But just know, this is as good as it gets. And that golden era, that 40 years of just great life under the reign of Solomon, it's not going to stick around. Hope you're enjoying jumping into God's word. I hope that this passage shows you how the blessing of God is on your life and how things go when you follow him. I hope it inspires you to really just commit every aspect of your life to him and really walk in his paths. Bye, everyone.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I sure did. And as a functioning adult in the 1980s, I would say, maybe the grass is greener. It was a good time, though. I maybe would pick the Roaring 20s with a bit of the 60s. I'm not sure. But I did appreciate Jonny's word to us and just the call to follow, to follow in the good path that God has for us and to see his goodness in our lives. And so I hope that you will enjoy the readings this week. And if you are not able to have a copy yourself, they're online every day that you can see them on our website, or you can subscribe to have them into your email each day. Or of course you can get a print copy as well. So I hope you will join us again next week. And I think I will have a live guest, but you never do know. Jonny, I'm sure you're listening at some point. Thank you again for joining us. And everyone, you have a great week. Bye for now.